It's the Growing for Market podcast.
And that's been a big shift in perspective for me, kind of headline versus living it, where I would read the headlines about, someone got taken that shouldn't have. And I realized that, like, in my head, I was assuming, well, that's an exception to the rule. They made a mistake and, whatever, for every 100 people they were supposed to get, they nabbed 3 people they shouldn't. And like, that's an exception. And I was just kind of assuming that. And then as I've watched things play out in Minneapolis, again, in my community and people I know and how it's impacting them, what I'm seeing is that those aren't anomalies. Like, that's the plan, that's the goal. And that was a big mind shift for me of like, oh my God, these aren't accidents or, bad apple officers or something. Like, they're doing a great job. This is their plan and they're following the plan.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Sam Oschwald Tilton to the Growing for Market podcast. Sam has been a writer for Growing for Market magazine for many years, which makes sense because he's been a farmer, worked other jobs in the industry, and been a farm educator for many years. I counted 15 bylines from Sam in the magazine over the years, including the cover story in the January 2026 magazine about macronutrients, the cover story of the January 2025 magazine about the macro impact of micronutrients, and a lot of other great stories over the years. So if you're a magazine subscriber, you can read all his stuff in the archives. And one thing I really love about your writing, Sam, is you have a real voice as a writer, which is both playful and knowledgeable, which can make some of the technical subjects you write about more fun to read about. But today, we are not here to talk about your articles. More to the point, Sam is a resident of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where most listeners will probably know an immigration crackdown has been going on for the past few weeks. And as Sam and I were communicating about an upcoming article, he was sharing some of what he was seeing with his own eyes there in Minneapolis. And not only was it a different angle than what I've seen in most other coverage, but in an industry like farming, where an estimated 40% of the agricultural workforce in the United States is undocumented, the way immigration enforcement is being conducted has a much bigger impact on the farm community than it does on a lot of other industries. Sam told me, quote, "I thought I understood what was happening with the, quote, immigration crackdowns from reading the headlines from other states. But when it happened here, I realized how limited a, quote, headline understanding is compared to feeling it and seeing it impact people," end quote. So I asked him if he'd like to do a podcast interview about what he's seeing, and here we are. Because while there is a surge of enforcement going on in Minneapolis right now, it's likely those federal agents are going to be deployed elsewhere. So what's going on in Minneapolis could be coming to your area. So without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Sam.
Yeah, Andrew, I really appreciate you having me on for this topic.
Yeah. When we were talking, I felt like I would be ignoring a big story. One of the biggest stories of our current times if we didn't talk about it. And so I also appreciate your willingness to share with us, because based on what you told me, I'm sure it's a very emotional issue. And okay, and for our audience, I would like to ask everyone to just listen with an open mind. I know this is politically charged in the kind of issue where people quickly retreat to their own corners. But personally, I don't think either party has been doing a great job on immigration. If they had, we wouldn't be where we are now. As a farmer, I wonder why the H-2A guest worker program hasn't been expanded and streamlined, right? If 40% of the ag workers in this country are undocumented, obviously there's a huge demand. And if there are people literally dying to get here and do jobs that Americans don't want to do, it seems like the sensible thing to do would be to make it easier on the worker and farmer side of things to be a legal guest worker. If you're not familiar with the H-2A program, I linked 2 articles in the show notes that have run in GFM in the past few years about how to navigate the guest worker program from the farmer perspective. And as you can read in the articles, it's doable, but it could be a lot easier if there were the political will to make it so. So check out those articles in the show notes if you'd like to try using the guest worker program or just see what it takes to navigate it. Okay, Sam, before we talk about Minneapolis, can you tell us a bit about your farming background that informs this conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I've worked in a few different farms and farm sizes and scales. And along that experience, worked with different farm workers. So I worked on Amish farm with, Amish people working there. I worked on vegetable farms with mostly non-white workforce. The white people were like me that were college educated and, wanted to learn about farming. But then a lot of other people working there that were more like the professionals that did it year after year and could bunch kale a lot faster than me. They pretty much always were not from America. Some of them would be undocumented. One of them was my best friend for many years and until he moved back to Guatemala. And I've visited him there many times and been to his wedding, and he's a dear friend and got to learn, a little bit through his perspective what his life was like here. Yeah, and then over the years being at different farms selling machinery or giving talks, etc. Yeah, just seeing kind of the full spectrum of the workers on vegetable farms, from native-born Americans to immigrants to undocumented immigrants, just that whole spectrum. Yeah, but I guess I could say never as an employer, having employed people like that. Yeah.
Okay. And I know that you've moved around a bit, but how long have you lived in Minneapolis?
We've been here 3 years. I just see my wife pulling up. She started a graduate program at the university, so we moved here about 3 years ago, and we live on the north side of Minneapolis. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. And how and when did you notice the ICE enforcement in your city?
So I would say just around New Year's. So, I had been reading the headlines, like you said in your great intro, about Chicago and New Jersey, and I kind of pride myself, or I think it's important to stay up on the news, and so I spent a fair amount of time doing that, and so I was aware of the immigration crackdowns happening elsewhere. But then it started happening in Minneapolis, and, we would hear about it, it would be on the news, friends would be telling me about it, American citizen friends of mine that are brown just started acting a lot different and having a lot more fear. But then some people in my neighborhood got abducted by ICE kind of early on in that crackdown. And just the fact that they were abducted and how they were abducted, then that all of a sudden it was like, whoa, this isn't a headline anymore. This is a lot more real all of a sudden.
People in your neighborhood were abducted by ICE. Did you see it happen or did you hear about it from them?
Well, I'm sorry to say, I got to take a step back and tell you that I do a lot of public speaking. And I haven't been as nervous to do public speaking as this in a long time. I've lost sleep over this. And the reason is that it's become clear here that there's a lot of ICE is paying attention to what people say. And I can get more into that. And so I have to, unfortunately, really try and balance sharing with your listeners what I'm personally experiencing. But I also need to protect those around me. And so I'll probably speak in some generalities. But I do want your listeners to know that what's happening here is very real and very personal, but I do need to kind of speak in generalities and a little more distant, unfortunately. But anyhow, I have not seen anyone be abducted by ICE. I have spoken with families who have been and what happened, and I can share that. What my wife and I have seen driving around our neighborhood is what, we have names for all this stuff now because it's normal, unfortunately, are these ghost cars. And so what ICE is doing here is, one is they really want to instill terror. And again, all I'm sharing is what I see. I'm not, so I see that that's true, and I'm happy to tell people how. And the other thing is they want to abduct people very quickly because it's not good when, a crowd comes and have to spray pepper spray and whatever. And so the tactics that they're using is, they'll find a car that they're tracking or a person, or they have brown skin, or they speak with an accent, whatever reason they want to pull them over. Sometimes they'll put their lights on, like the cops would, But sometimes they just run into you, and they'll just run into a car and push you on the side, or they'll box you in and stop real fast right in front of you, and you'll run into them or whatever. And then they'll get out and they'll say, "Get out of your car in 3 seconds or I will break your window." And I would really encourage everyone, put yourself in this every situation I'm describing. And I think it's a good exercise. Ask yourself what you might do and what would be reasonable in a split second. And so what they'll do is they'll get out. They might have their guns drawn and pointed right at your face from outside your car, or they might not. But they'll say, "Get out of your car right now, or I'm going to break your window." And they're masked, and sometimes they're in uniform, but sometimes they're not. And the cars are all unmarked. So you can imagine like a random Subaru pulling up behind you, like a 2000 Subaru with some dude in jeans coming out with a mask and a handgun pointed at you. And they'll say, "Get out in 3 seconds, or we'll break your window." And either you can get out or they'll break your window. They're true to their word. They'll break your window in 3 seconds. They'll break your window, they'll unlock your door, and they'll drag you out. And then they'll drag you out and they'll put you in whatever car that they have, and then they'll drive off. And I could go on I will go on later about what happens next because it's very important. But that's kind of how these abductions have worked for the people that I've spoken with. But sorry. So I haven't witnessed this. I've spoken to many people it's happened to or to their families. But in our neighborhood, we see these ghost cars. So this is where ICE has stopped someone. I didn't see it, so I can't say that. But what we see is these cars that are crashed with windows broken. And sometimes like the car's still running or there's keys in it, or, the car's in drive, or, this isn't like a police stop where the police have a sequence that they follow. Yeah, so that's what I'm seeing.
Right. Well, that actually jives with what we've seen here in Maine as well. There was a much smaller enforcement activity going on, which seems like it's actually subsided. But I know there was some criticism from local law enforcement here in Maine because they were arresting people and leaving their cars running on the side of the road.
It's a safety issue, yeah.
Yeah. So, that's almost inviting law breaking itself, right? Because it's like you couldn't make it easier to steal someone's car than to leave it idling on the side of the road. One of many things going on here. But yeah, that's troubling.
Well, and for example, let's say that, God forbid, you're drinking and driving or you're speeding or whatever, and the cops stop you and they take you in. They're going to call your wife. You're going to call your wife from jail, whatever. Somehow they're going to allow you to communicate what's happening and that, you're not going to be at work. You're not going to pick up your kids. Your car needs to get towed, whatever. That's part of the process,
Yeah.
But here that doesn't happen. So I've spoken with people whose family has gotten picked up, and all they knew was that they didn't show up at work that day. And then a day later, they would find where their car was sitting there. And 2 days later, they would find out where their husband was. So again, it's just what I'm seeing is not any sort of protocol like that. It's just people are abducted off the street, and then your family finds out about it at some point a few days later.
That's troubling because I believe it's called habeas corpus here in the United States. It's basically show me the body. It's my understanding is that when you get arrested in this country, they're supposed to tell your family or somebody where you are. And so it does make me wonder if it's deliberate or just lack of training or both. Clearly they're looking to scare people here, but that does not seem to be legal to me. So, all right. So I guess what's the next step then if they've, grabbed somebody off the street?
So again, I think it's really important for me just to share kind of personal experience of what's going on in my community and not speak to headlines and whatnot from people in my neighborhood and talking to their families and whatnot. So people have gotten abducted. There's a single building downtown, the federal building. It's called the Whipple building. And so anyone who gets taken by ICE, whether you're undocumented and have no reason to be here, or whether you are a refugee and you were brought here and vetted or whatever, whether you're me and you're a citizen, because ICE is also taking observers and stuff like that. But anyway, once they take you, you go to this federal building, and the federal building is not set up to hold people as a jail. And so again, just from speaking to people who have been there, you're packed into rooms of 20 people in a super tight room. And I I'm sorry if I get very personal with this. That's a very emotional thing, but as a Jew, it harkens back to the Holocaust and to Germany for me, there's a lot of sad connections there. One of which is that they're packed so tightly in the room that there's no room to sleep or lay down. You just have to stand up for a long period of time. And the other thing is there's one toilet in this room for 20 people, so you got to do your thing with everyone watching, whatever. And there's just all sorts of things where it's not set up to be a prison. So like if you need medication, you can't get that, right? Like a lot of people have diabetes or asthma or whatever. And you can imagine if you just got grabbed out of your car with the window broken, you don't have any of that with you. So anyway, so you're in the Whipple building like this in that giant room for ideally just 1 to 2 days. What ICE has been doing is they really want to get people down to Texas as fast as they can. So that I know from having spoken people, I can guess why that is. You know, the laws are different in Texas. It's easier for them to hold you. You're closer to the border with South America, whatever. But anyway, as soon as they can, they'll fly you out of the Minneapolis airport down to Texas. And then you're into a detention center there. And they've been building a lot of new camps there, you know, and most of them, well, anyhow. So then you're there. And what I've heard from people that have been there is oftentimes you're shackled on your legs, you know, and you're just in shackles all the time. You're also really crowded. The communication is better. So it seems like they're giving people like iPads or phones, or they can be in better communication with their family. Like that's when you first get a call from your, you know, husband or wife or whoever, like, hey, I got abducted 2 days ago. I'm in Texas. I'm okay. Like that's when people first hear from people. And then I've heard kind of mixed reviews of either like, you know, it sucks to be here, but I'm getting by okay, to they're not feeding us and I got like an apple and a cracker for the last day to eat, and like it's really tough.
Hi, I don't want to interrupt, but I thought this might be relevant, is that I just found out right now a friend of mine who lives down the block just got arrested observing a situation like 5 blocks from here. Okay. So this is just happening really commonly, really like frequently, that we just get these updates. And the update was that ICE was close by taking someone like 10 minutes ago. And then within a few minutes, our friend had been arrested just for like filming the situation. So I'll leave you to it. But
thank you, Julia.
Unfolding in real time all the time.
And we can talk about that too, like how we learn about things and how it just keeps on changing. And
Yeah. Okay. They're also arresting people who are like observing, and I guess like people are filming all this, right? Because everybody's walking around with a camera in their pocket these days with their smartphone, right? So people are filming this, so then they're arresting the people who are filming it. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I would say, you know, one thing that's hard about this for me is I'll be in Minneapolis and I'm seeing the reality of it. I'm living it, you know, et cetera. And then I'll leave. Like I was just in Madison for the Awesome Organic Vegetable Production Conference. And it's not really true, but it's like leaving a war zone where like the reality is just different all of a sudden and people don't get it. And like you think the normal rules still apply, but they don't. So for example, one thing I've heard friends in other states say is, well, you know, ICE, they're just getting the people that shouldn't be here anyway. And if that was true, like, cool, sounds good to me. We got immigration rules. Like me personally, I'm okay with that. But I will tell you from my and our experience being here, that's just not what's happening. And that's been a big shift in perspective for me, kind of headline versus living it, where I would read the headlines about, you know, someone got taken that shouldn't have. And I realized that like subliminally in my head, I was assuming, well, that's an exception to the rule. You know, they made a mistake and, you know, whatever, for every 100 people they were supposed to get, they nabbed 3 people they shouldn't. And like, that's an exception. And I was just kind of assuming that. And then as I've watched things play out in Minneapolis, again, in my community and people I know and how it's impacting them, what I'm seeing is that those aren't anomalies. Like that's the plan. That's the goal. And that was a big mind shift for me of like, oh my God, these aren't accidents or, you know, bad apple officers or something. Like they're doing a great job. This is their plan and they're following the plan.
Right. Yeah. And the fact that they've been so circumspect about providing the details of the people they're apprehending, it makes us speculate. But yeah, like the fact that so many of the people that are known to have been apprehended had legal status, it does look like they're either just grabbing anybody they possibly can, or it's almost like speculative detention. It seems like they're almost like, let's get anybody we can and see if we can find a reason to kick them out of the country.
Yeah, and I can tell you on our part of town, just in our, say, 1 mile radius in the last week, which is sort of since they announced that drawdown, we've had more ICE agents around than before. Just yesterday, there was like 10 different ICE cars on my block. And, I could tell you, again, I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. But the other thing now is they're targeting schools. So they're like driving around schools. And another thing I've seen with people in my community that are brown, even that are here, legally are citizens, maybe they were born here or whatever, but just have brown skin. It seems like they're not all here anymore. Psychologically, I've started calling it to myself like paying the brown tax, where they're always hyper aware, like whether they're at their house, whether they're at a coffee shop, whether they're in the car. It's hard to have conversations because I'm realizing like 1/3 of their brain power is always checking on the environment. Yeah, I think, again, a big part of this for me, kind of beyond the headlines, is seeing the looks on people's faces and like the fear in their eyes. And that's not something I'm used to. And it's just very, very sad and is a lot more than a headline,
Yeah. Well, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk with you, because, like we all see the news, but there's so much going on. I think it's really easy to just like scan the headlines, and I wanted to see what it's like living there right now.
I mean, to me, one of the biggest sadnesses for me is children are not going to school, whether anyone in their family has any issue of, or flavor of undocumentation, whether that's like them or an extended member or whoever, or just if their parents are scared because, like we're saying, people are just getting grabbed. There are a lot of children in my city, like on my blocks around here, that have not left their houses in 6 weeks. And I'm talking like they don't go to school, they don't go to soccer, they don't go to church, they don't go to the grocery store, they don't go anywhere. They stay in their houses because they're that afraid. And people, bring them groceries and bring them stuff. But like the fear is real, and the impacts of that fear is literally like a large proportion of, I don't know how many school children there are in Metro Twin Cities, I don't know. But I know in my circles, there's a large proportion of children that have not left their house in 6 weeks. And then just the struggle is real with their parents of, again, I just really encourage everyone, put yourself in all these different shoes. Like, what would I do? How would I feel? Their parents, on the one hand, they don't want to go out because, God forbid, imagine getting snatched by some masked men and your children don't know and they're home, and is there someone to take care of them? And will you see them again? And maybe you'll be in Texas, whatever. So their parents don't want to go out, but at the same time, you got to pay rent. And so there's this huge tension of wanting to stay home as much as you can and needing to go to work and all of the like fear that happens with that. Yeah. And again, I can't speak to like, if there's a Department of Homeland Security memo that says like, note to Minneapolis crew, make sure and terrorize people today. I have no idea. But if that is their intention, like it's sure working, or if it's not their intention, they're way off base because everyone is very freaked out and very scared. Obviously, like the immigrant or brown people here are very scared and have way more reason to be so than me. But even people like me are like, ICE is driving crazy. Like I live on a little residential street, with little kids playing outside, and there'll be cars that go by doing like 50 miles an hour and, and all the crazy driving that they do to pull people over. And like, it's a very tense time all the time of what's happening, and everything's always changing and not feeling safe. Yeah. And this has been another like perspective shift for me living through this is, I grew up in the 90s, and for whatever that's worth. But so I always, I always thought that the United States and our government is not perfect. And I always tried to educate myself about all those flaws, but that I always thought we were like aiming towards justice, and that we had laws. And even if a law was broken, like, you could go to court here, and like, we're such a wonderful country because of that. And again, for me, like below the headline or the perspective shift here has been the law does not count anymore. And imagine what that would do to you. That's a huge perspective shift. And what I mean is ICE is going into people's house without a judicial warrant, right? Like I was always raised, if you don't do anything wrong, the cops aren't going to bust into your house. They have to have a warrant or whatever. And I know the listeners, like you probably think that because that's probably true where you live. But where I live, that's not true anymore. And for example, my wife's telling me to calm down. It's really hard, Or for example, there's like over 100 judicial rulings from Minneapolis about immigration that aren't being followed. Or for example, ICE might pull you over and you show them your papers and they still grab you. And so, whereas my friends that live kind of everywhere else in the country, it's still true for you that like the law applies. That's still true. But that's a difference in perspective for me now, because what I'm seeing, again, not what I'm reading, what I'm seeing is that the law doesn't really apply anymore, at least to these masked ICE people. And so that's a perspective shift, And like, again, I was always raised, if the cops or someone pulled a gun on someone, I generally would trust, okay, there's a reason they had to do that. But again, my perspective is shifting because I'm seeing people get out of the car with a gun pointed at you, not even knowing you, except that like you're brown and I pulled you over. Maybe I was too naive and I should have known that years ago with all sorts of things, but it's a real perspective shift for me. I don't know if now's a good time, but I guess the other thing I wanted to share just in terms of what it feels like to be here is, on the one hand, it's incredibly sad. I mean, a depth of emotion for me that I haven't felt before in terms of seeing the fear and the sadness of people in my community. I haven't experienced this before. And so it's incredibly sad. But the other thing that brings out is it feels to me that the people here are closer than ever. But now so many people are waving to each other. I'll drive by and everyone's kind of giving each other eyes like, are you okay? Are you okay? If someone stopped on the side of the road, you doing all right? And people are really checking in more. And the other thing, again, unfortunately, because so many people here are stuck at home out of fear, they can't go out. Like there's women that aren't getting medical care, that are about to give birth, like don't have diapers, don't have food, all sorts of stuff. But just regular people are really trying to fill that gap. So like today I was at 2 different coffee shops for working and picking stuff up. A lot of the coffee shops you walk into here, they have piles of supplies. So like groceries, diapers, tampons, whatever. And I'll go in and I'll start working on the computer. And then a few hours later, I go to leave and all those things are gone. And so it's like there are all these community hubs where people are collecting things that people need because they can't leave their homes. And then there's all sorts of community members that are taking those to people that need them. So that's been a really beautiful thing to watch. Again, incredibly sad that that's necessary, but really beautiful that everyone is kind of stepping up and just being neighborly. I guess it's just made me think a lot more about what it means to like be in a neighborhood or to be someone's neighbor. Yeah.
Do you know how it worked out for the people that you know who got deported down to Texas?
Yeah. So one of them, forgive me for laughing. It's just like so sad and ridiculous. It's like I can either cry or laugh. One of them decided to sign his own deportation order because he did not want to stay in the detention camp anymore, just to like get out of that hole. And so he signed that, but now he's still in that hole waiting to get moved out or whatever. And another person is right in the middle of it. So they were granted some sort of bond or something. I think it was a bond. And that cost $10,000 that their family, who isn't really able to work right now, had to go around and find $10,000 cash. And so he was released, just like all these people. You get down in Texas, then they realize, oh crap, you're a citizen, you're a refugee, we don't have legal standing to keep you. And then what they do is they just let you out of the detention center on the side of the road. Period. You don't have an ID. You don't have money. You don't have a phone. Again, please just put yourself in these shoes. What do you do? So anyway, so he had to get a ticket. And so he came back on the plane to Minneapolis. And my understanding is he's got a ankle bracelet now. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know his situation or whatever, but now he's here and waiting for another court hearing. And it sounds like a lot of people that go in front of the immigration judges, because the immigration judges, I forget the number, maybe a third of them were replaced a month or two ago. Very few people are being allowed to stay. And so he's waiting to go in front of an immigration judge, and then whatever gets decided. But I mean, again, it's like I can tell you this, or I'm telling you, one-off stories, and the way our human mind works, or at least mine does, you're like, okay, that's one piece of information. That's another piece of information. But when you live here, these are just single stories I'm telling you. Like, this is the whole community all the time. There's a lot of these stories all the time, and it adds up to like real people and like real tears and real fear. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine it. Yeah. It must affect the whole just feeling of the city to know that this is going on and be so visible.
Yeah. My wife and I, one thing, a lot of people are trying to support immigrant-owned businesses, and especially Latino-owned businesses, because they're being hit hard. My wife and I were out at a Colombian restaurant the other night. And again, just to your point of like, it impacts everything. The place was empty. It probably seated, 100 people, and it's just empty. And there's someone at the door now to let you in, because again, we're talking about laws and do they matter or not. By law, ICE cannot go onto private property, right? Unless they have a judicial warrant. If you have a judicial warrant, great, go for it. But they're just barging in. And so a lot of businesses now, again, life is just different. If you go to a restaurant, you're used to walking in, right? I am. But now the doors are locked and there's like doormen, because ICE is just going in. And so they have to let you in one by one. So we got let in one by one, and super tasty food. Oh man, I had the leftovers today. It was great. But just empty restaurant, no one there, because their normal clientele is just at home, afraid to go out. Again, I would just encourage listeners, like, put yourself in all these different shoes or these different perspectives, like little old Sam living in Minneapolis with my little flower garden and hanging out with the kids, and, whatever your situation is. And all of a sudden, well, here, if I can just give some math. So there's 600 Minneapolis police officers. So just think how often you see a police officer or whatever. And there were 3,000 ICE agents here. So do the math of how many multiples more ICE agents there were than police officers. So just put yourself in my shoes, or whatever shoes, if you're doing your thing and you're reading the headlines and, you got your life to live and take care of the kids and clean the bathroom once a week, and, you only have so much bandwidth. But yeah, God forbid if this situation happens for other people. Yeah, I just wanted to share our experience of how real that has been feeling.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's upsetting to hear, so I can imagine why it's an emotional subject for you. I don't know. This might be a silly question, but do you have any tips? Like if ICE starts doing enforcement in people's areas, and I say it's a silly question in a way because I don't know what you can do. And I also know, like I had heard that if people are filming them, they will figure out who the people are. So right. On the one hand, I guess I would be curious if that's a tactic. Like I had heard that was a tactic they were using there. It's sort of like they don't want to be filmed or observed, but it's still a free country. And so they can't stop you in most cases from filming or observing them. But it's like they're going to figure out who you are and probably, may take steps against you if you do try to film or observe them. So I don't know, like you've been in it for a while now. Any tips for other people if ICE comes to town?
Sure. I mean, and again, I'll just speak from my personal experience, and I'm not like an activist or have been involved in this for a long time. Although again, recently my perspective and my opinions are really changing based on what I'm experiencing. I would say, first of all, there's already groups in your community that are supporting immigrants or that are organizing. And so if you want to be way more educated than me, feel free to just find those groups or find groups in Minneapolis and learn from them. And yeah, I'm in no way like an expert on this. For me personally, what I've been doing that feels positive, I would say one thing is identify who are the people in your life that are going to be most impacted and victimized by this. Like I've been mentioning my friends whose skin color is brown, but otherwise have the same background as me, were born here or whatever, identifying who those people are in your life, because life is going to be a lot harder for them. And so identifying who they are and what kind of support they might need. I feel like my white skin is like a get out of jail free card to a certain extent. And so I want to use that to be helping other people. So I think that's one thing. And a nice thing that's come out of this is more connections with our neighbors, both the blocks around me and the wider neighborhood. And so for me, that had to start only when like people in my neighborhood were getting abducted. But if people want to get ahead of that, feel free to start talking to your neighbors. And again, just put yourself in some different shoes or perspectives. What would we do if XYZ happened? And so, I've got friends with brown skin who have like emergency plans now, and they have apps on their phones and whatever that like ICE might not give you time to make a phone call. Like they can touch a button and their loved ones are going to get emergency emails, and they've already identified their immigration lawyer. So all these things that seem like you get time to do, at least for us, you don't get that time. Stuff just happens fast. And so kind of preparing ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to have a plan. And I should point out, racial profiling is illegal. You're not supposed to be able to use racial profiling as a reason to pull somebody over. Like, obviously, it probably happens. It definitely seems like they're doing it in this case. Once again, who's going to stop a guy in a mask with a gun? It's like it's supposed to be illegal, but they're doing it. They're getting away with it. And it's probably going to be years, if ever, if they face the legal repercussions of it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how all these Minneapolitans who are going through this, how we communicate with people now and in the future, because I feel like each of our realities dictates our perspective. It's very much based on what we've experienced in life. And it would make sense to me if people from other states are like, no, the laws matter and the cops follow the laws. And like, I would understand them saying that. And I used to think that, and like, that's true for them. But now for us, certain things are not true anymore. And so we're just living in a different kind of reality in some ways.
Yeah. Well, which is why I appreciate you talking to us about this, Sam, because obviously it's upsetting, but I think there's a lot of value to hearing someone's perspective, first person. Even we live in such a digital age.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. It's hard to keep track of everything, but just to be able to, that's the value of the podcast in a way, is we can sit down and, talk about stuff and say, oh, what about that? And follow up and things. So I really do appreciate you sharing the perspective. And that's actually pretty much the questions that I had for you. I guess the last thing that I want to say before I ask you about where people can help is just that, like, one way that I've heard this debate framed is that we can either be importing workers or we can be importing food. And I think it would be a lot better for just the food security and resiliency of our nation to import the workers legally than to be importing, than to get all the food from somewhere else, right? Because if, obviously I'm biased as a farmer, I think our food security would be a lot better with domestic production rather than just importing everything. And we saw that during COVID. I feel like, remember things were disrupted, and there were times when certain food products just weren't on the shelf because our supply chain was disrupted. And it's going to be a lot more resilient if we have the production here at home. And so I really wish they would figure out a way to meet the demand for agricultural workers jobs that Americans don't want to do. I should say, one thing I didn't say before about the H-2A program is that there's a whole mechanism in the H-2A program where you have to advertise your agricultural job. Like, you actually have to prove that you advertised your job and either didn't get anybody or didn't get enough people to fill your position before you can even hire the workers. So that kind of negates the whole thing of like immigrants are taking jobs that Americans want, because I don't think most Americans want those jobs.
Yeah, there's, just with my wife and I, there's, with the situation now, there's a lot to be thinking about and doing all the time. And the little bit of time where I can kind of go for a walk or reflect, I've been thinking about how we can dehumanize each other. And at least for me, what I see of how people are being treated is I got to think that the people that are planning this and ordering this and the people that are on the ground doing this, you can only treat people like this if you're able to put them in a different box and say they're different than me. They don't have the same amount of feelings. They can stand up for 30 hours straight and it wouldn't hurt them like it hurts me. And when they can't talk to their wife, it's not as hard. And I've just been thinking a lot about what it means to dehumanize people and the ways that I maybe do that to certain degrees. And to your point about agricultural labor, I've been on vegetable farms where I think some of the workers, it feels like they're kind of second-class citizens. And I think probably because they're undocumented, there's a kind of a separation there where like they don't really want to talk to visitors to the farm and they want to keep a low profile. And that all makes sense to me. But I think it also adds to it makes it easier for me to like dehumanize them, where like they're literally in the shadows, like they literally don't want to be seen. And I've just been trying to reflect both in myself and like in society, what are the ways that we're able to dehumanize people, even if they're little ways, because at least here it sure seems like it's adding up to something nasty.
Yeah, two thoughts on that. One thing is you're right. I think if the people who are ordering this thought about their own family members being treated the way that these people are treated, they would be outraged. It's just kind of like golden rule stuff. It's like we shouldn't be treating people that way. And to your point about second class citizens, yeah, I also have worked on multiple farms that definitely had undocumented workers. There's many years ago now. It's like 20 years ago when I think of it. I worked on some farms in California and Washington State, and I know they definitely had undocumented workers. And I thought about that sometimes when people would come out to the farm and take pictures, because I could tell like they didn't want to be in the picture in case they didn't want to be identified because they didn't have legal status. But that's like people, if you're buying vegetables at the grocery store,
yes,
like do the math. If 40%, under some estimates more, but yeah, let's say 40% of the workers are undocumented, look at the produce in the grocery store. At least 40% of it was probably picked by an undocumented worker. So,
well, and what does that dynamic do to our conception of reality? Like, I love shopping at the food co-op, right? I try and buy as much organic as I can. And like, for example, when I buy organic Valley milk, God bless them, who are the people on that package? Who are the farmers? They're always the white farm owners, right? Oh, they're so beautiful. Oh, it must be so nice to work on a dairy farm. Well, I'm from Wisconsin. All of the dairy farms I know, Latinos do most of the work, and the statistics are that most of them are undocumented. But that's not the picture we get, right? It's all the white people doing all the work. But to your point, like, there's a reason that only certain people are in those photos.
Yeah. And I think our audience is probably a bit more acquainted with that reality, just because I assume that our audience is either farmers or people who want to be a farmer. But given that less than 1% of the U.S. population farms, less than 1% of the documented U.S. population farms anymore, there's a lot of people who probably see that, happy white family and a very clean cow on the side of the milk carton and think that's the reality. So Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a lot of imbalances in our agricultural system that we need to be dealt with some way or the other. And I just don't know. The state we're in right now is very troubling. I feel like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like our politicians don't solve it because they would lose an issue. It's like
something to keep talking about.
Yeah. It just, and I get it. I have a very particular perspective because I am a farmer. And I'm like, why can't they just make the guest worker program bigger? Like, maybe that's an oversimplification, but I also feel like that's not something I hear politicians talking about. Why not? So, all right. Well, for everybody's sake, I sure hope that we or somebody can figure something out, because obviously this is not a way to run a railroad. But all right, Sam. So if people have been listening to this, where can people help if they want to?
Yeah, like I said, as far as I see, the big need is money, because a lot of people are staying home and not working. And so that's money for like rent and groceries. You can look for yourself if you want. There's one particular organization I've appreciated being involved in called Community Aid Network, MN. And I think you'll link to them, but it's CANMN.org. And if you got a few bucks to throw their way, they're delivering groceries and helping people with rent and diapers and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah, we'll link that in the show notes just to make it easy for folks, and we will also link those 2 articles about the H2A program if that is interesting to people and gives this discussion some context. So, where can people find you on social media or online or wherever you want people to look you up, Sam? If you do,
maybe someday I'll be more social media out there, but mostly just send me an email or find me on Facebook. So glacialdrift@protonmail.com, or look me up by my name on Facebook. And I'm always happy to talk to people.
Okay. Sounds good. Sam, I really appreciate you talking to us about this. I think it took courage and also clearly a lot of passion, but what we need is people telling their stories. And so I really appreciate you sharing with us.
Yeah, right back at you, Andrew. Thanks for making the space, and to your listeners, thanks for taking the hour to listen, and I hope you're able to get something out of this.
Yeah. Well, we definitely will. All right, well, thank you, Sam. I wish you the best in what sounds like difficult circumstances. It's a better days ahead.
Yeah, amen. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.